thank you for inviting me to speak today and for allowing me to join all these incredible women who are here. I really, really appreciate it, and it really has been a wonderful weekend, and I thank you so much for all the hard work you've put into making it happen. As Steph mentioned, and as some of you will know, I run an organisation called Women's Forum Australia, an independent think tank that does research, education and public policy advocacy around issues affecting women and girls, with a particular focus on addressing behaviours and practices that are harmful and abusive to them. We work on a whole host of issues, including many that have been discussed here this weekend, including surrogacy, prostitution, and combating the sexualisation of women and girls more broadly. But the issue of gender ideology and the erasure of biological sex has been keeping us particularly busy over the last few years. This is because it touches on almost every area of life, and because if we can't even define what a woman is, what hope do we have on making progress on these other issues? Now, I've tried to make my topic sound a little bit fancy by using a Charles Dickens reference, but in reality, what I'm going to do is just give you a bit of an update about the 2 campaigns that we've been running relating to self-ID at the moment. A lot has happened in the campaign, so this will just be a little bit of a highlight reel. Now, I'm going to start with the No Men in Women's Prisons campaign in Victoria, and I'd just like to give a quick shout out and thank you to Steph for all the wonderful work that you've done with the prison data in Australia on this issue. So, as you all know, there is currently a male rapist being housed in a women's prison in Victoria. Some of you will first have come across Lisa Jones when news.com.au published an article titled "Female Sex Attackers Horror Demand" in December 2021. It told the story of how a Melbourne woman had been sexually assaulted by another woman on a Richmond street. Except Lisa Jones was not another woman. Lisa Jones was a trans-identifying male. Women took to social media with the hashtag #NotOurCrimes to decry the injustice of violent male sexual crimes being attributed to women, and the injustice to the victims of those crimes. Almost a year later, in August 2022, the Herald Sun broke the story about how Jones, a man who had a history of violent sexual offending, was being housed in Victoria's Dame Phyllis Frost Women's Prison, and how distraught female prisoners had been petitioning to have him removed. Not long after that, with no one having listened to these women's pleas for help, Sasha approached me and asked if Women's Forum would be keen to run a petition for Jones's removal. I said absolutely. We got it set up on our website and asked multiple women and advocacy groups to partner with us, many of whom have been part of this weekend. They shared it with their own supporters, as did several female politicians who have consistently stood up for women's sex-based rights, including Senator Claire Chandler, Senator Jacinta Price, and former Senator Amanda Stoker. Within 5 days, we had about 5,000 signatures. We wrote to the Victorian Minister for Corrections, the Minister for Women, the Minister for Equality, the Attorney General, the Premier, and all the shadow equivalents, explaining the human rights and safety concerns we had for these women, and asking for their intervention. We did the same with the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, as well as the Australian Human Rights Commissioner, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and the Victorian Ombudsman. Initially, we heard nothing from any of them, but I sent a sternly worded email 3 weeks later informing them of the people who had signed the petition and asking for their response. After this, several of them did respond. Attorney General Jacqueline Symes declined to intervene, saying she referred it to the Corrections Minister. Equality Minister Harriet Shing outright dismissed our concerns, responding instead with her own concerns about the distress and fatigue trans people are feeling over debate about their rights. It made no reference whatsoever to the safety and rights of women, or to the distress and fear that female inmates are experiencing as a result of a male sex offender being housed in their prison. In fact, the letter didn't mention the word woman at all. Sal Grover penned a powerful response, which she shared on Twitter, and was subsequently blocked by Shing. The Victorian Human Rights Commissioner agreed to meet with Corrections Victoria to discuss our concerns, then basically came back saying they couldn't do anything. This was interesting, as the Federal Human Rights Commission also said they had no power to do anything. which leaves these women in a pretty dire situation when it comes to protection of their human rights. Victorian Human Rights Commissioner Ro Allen is a woman who, according to Wikipedia, identifies as gender diverse and uses the term walker to walk between genders. I noticed as I was preparing my presentation that that's actually been removed and updated, so I wonder if us pointing that out during the campaign had anything to do with that. After the pointless meeting with the Victorian Human Rights Commissioner, Corrections Victoria responded to us, doubling down on its requirements, which require prisoner placement based on gender identity rather than sex. This is despite the requirement stating transgender prisoners are to be risk assessed for the security of the prison, considering the nature of their offending and likelihood of reoffending, and that the safety and welfare of all prisoners is paramount. It ignored the UN rules reference on its website, requiring that males and females be housed separately and that the distinctive needs of women be taken into account. The Ombudsman was looking like the most promising avenue, as we had received correspondence from them saying they were conducting inquiries using their own motion powers. However, after a conversation with one of the case officers recently, it seems their inquiries have not even yet amounted to a formal investigation, and that there is no urgency in this happening. We ultimately heard nothing from Premier Dan Andrews or Minister for Women Natalie Hutchins. During this time, our campaign received national media coverage, amplifying awareness of the issue in the public domain and calling on Victorian leaders to act. Women's Forum, along with other women, have continued to draw attention to the situation in the media when the opportunity arises, and Stasia and others also organised an independent protest outside Parliament in Melbourne. Of course, the ABC has been missing in action as usual, and The Age instead wrote a puff piece about how trans people experience sexual violence in Victorian prisons. The Dame Phyllis Frost saga was mentioned in the article, and women's fears of being housed with a male sex offender, but The Age followed it up with a flippant statement from La Trobe lecturer Matthew Mitchell about how anybody can perpetrate sexual violence. The article actually mentioned an allegation of sexual assault by a trans prisoner in another Victorian women's prison, but said the police investigation did not substantiate the complaint. Interesting, though, that the prisoner was apparently subsequently moved to a men's prison, and we know there are many reasons sexual assault complaints aren't able to be substantiated. As a result of inaction by local authorities, we made a joint submission to the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture, who had a visit scheduled for Australia in October last year. Caroline Norma from RMIT was a huge help with this. We highlighted the human rights risks to these female prisoners, and we asked to speak to them during its inspection of Australian detention facilities. However, the disappointing lack of cooperation from Australian state governments resulted in the UN suspending its visit. We also sent a copy of our submission to Dr. Alice Jill Edwards, an Australian and the first female Special Rapporteur on torture, requesting her assistance in our efforts to protect the human rights and safety of female prisoners in Australia, specifically in Victoria. Months later, we disappointingly have not received any response from Dr. Edwards. However, given her recent encouraging comments on the prisons issue in Scotland, we are going to follow her up, as well as write to Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem Al-Salem, who has been leading the charge on the issue in the UN. In addition to the petition, communications with Victorian officials and media coverage, we have also been running ads on social media to raise awareness and educate the public, as the sad reality is that so many people still have no idea this is happening. The ads also bring people back to the petition, and if they sign it, it means that we can contact them going forward with updates and calls to action. In addition to writing to the 2 UN Special Rapporteurs, we are also going to contact the new Corrections Minister who came in after the election last year. We will also continue to do what we can to support newly appointed MP Moira Deeming in her efforts to resolve this situation, as she has been outspoken on this issue, as you all know, and the prison is actually in her electorate. We have had a lot of traction on this issue, but it's only possible to get so far without a critical mass and without the media doing its job properly. However, we will continue to fight for these women until this rapist is removed from their prison. And in terms of how you yourselves and others can help, I will note a few things at the end after I talk about the Queensland campaign. Sorry, I know I'm speaking very quickly, it's because I've got a lot to cover. Alright, so because many of you are from Brisbane or have been following the Queensland Self-ID Bill, and because we've already talked about it quite a lot this weekend, I'll keep my comments on this one a little bit more brief. As we know, the bill was introduced in December last year, with Attorney General and Minister for Women, Shannon Fentiman, being quick to claim that those who opposed it were transphobic and that there was no evidence of harm to women from self-ID. The bill is actually even more extreme than the Scottish and German legislation in that there is no age limit whatsoever. Like many of you, we made a submission to the Parliamentary Committee over the holiday period and encouraged our supporters to do the same. We wrote articles in The Spectator, appeared on Sky News, and presented at the public hearing. Again, the government-funded media like the ABC have been missing in action. We were happy to be invited to speak at the public hearing, but were flabbergasted that not a single woman or women's group from Queensland were invited to speak, which is why we brought Sal Grover along with us. The independent and Liberal members appeared to be genuinely open and inquiring, while the Labor members seemed to have already made up their minds, as many of you would have noticed watching the hearing. The latter also parroted the no evidence of harm mantra and had apparently been told to use the line that there's no peer-reviewed evidence of harm to deflect, which ultimately makes zero sense because in no other scenario do we ask to see peer-reviewed evidence of harm when it is patently obvious from media coverage, court reporting and personal accounts. At the end of the hearing, Labor MP Jonty Bush was seen getting chummy with the man who had petitioned for the bill on social media. On the 24th of February, the committee handed down its report, recommending that the bill be passed. This was of course unsurprising, but no less disappointing. The committee ignored the overwhelming evidence of harm to women and girls from male self-identifying into female-only spaces, which included a bunch of follow-up evidence it requested after the public hearing, prepared by Sal, which we submitted to the committee. A supporter notified me recently that when the committee uploaded the document online, so pages and pages of examples of women and girls being harmed by self-ID, the committee actually stripped it of all links to supporting evidence and examples. This is obviously very concerning because it means that when the public goes and access this online, it can't actually access any of the examples that we've included. And when questioned about this, it informed us that it's policy to remove links, even though it has not done this consistently throughout the submissions. Others have already noted this, but it is important to emphasise that the committee's recommendation to pass the bill was by no means unanimous. While the 3 Labor members supported it, which was expected given it was their government's bill and that Labor MPs toe the line, the other 3 members, the 2 Liberals and 1 Independent, included statements of reservation highlighting the rushed consultation and concerns regarding harms to women and children. We didn't know whether Independent and Liberal MPs would fall on the issue before the hearing, but the reservations they expressed is, to me, a perfect example of what happens when people approach this issue with an open mind. Those of us who wrote submissions, contacted MPs, and fronted up to the public hearings can take some credit for the common sense expressed by those MPs. Had the committee not been stacked with Labor members and had the chair not had the casting vote, it could have been a very different outcome. Like with the Prisons Campaign in Victoria, we've been running ads to raise awareness and educate on this issue and draw people back to the petition and the campaign. We are almost at 10,000 and will now be able to mobilise these people to take actions like contacting MPs in the lead up to the parliamentary debate, which will likely happen in the next couple of months. In terms of next steps for both campaigns, I have a little, so these are some of the ads we'll be running. I'm not sure if any of you have actually seen them on social media, but we've been getting really good, a really good response. Like thousands and thousands of people have seen them, thousands of people have interacted with them. The most popular ones seem to be the men and women's toilet one, and the one directly above it, and I think that one down the bottom with the man putting on makeup. So in terms of next steps for both campaigns, I have a little QR code here that you can scan with your phone, or you can simply go to womensforumaustralia.com/next steps. I'll note that our website is currently experiencing some issues with our domain name, so we're currently using .com, but we'll revert back to .org in the next week. Basically, the page that it will take you to allows you to easily go to links to sign each petition, to share the petition, to contact your local members if you are in either of those states, to support the campaign. It also has links where you can contact the UN Special Rapporteurs for the Prisoners campaign and the new Corrections Minister. All right, nearly done. We are in a unique moment in the pushback against gender ideology, with coverage of this issue having picked up significantly over the past few years, both here and overseas, and with the rapidly unfolding positive developments, especially in places like the UK, precisely on the issues that I've discussed. This puts us in the best position possible to push back on these issues. That being said, law and policy wins are not often things that happen overnight, and dealing with two captured Labor governments in both these states means that we are, of course, fighting an uphill battle. And I have mentioned Labor a lot, but I will also note that the LNP haven't been any better in terms of actually speaking out on these issues either. But perhaps if they were in power, they wouldn't be pushing forward these bills and these types of policies and legislation. If nothing else, we are keeping receipts and raising awareness along the way so that these politicians can eventually be held accountable. As I've said to some of you during the course of this weekend, if the media was doing its job properly in holding our governments to account, like the journalists did in Scotland when they confronted Sturgeon about male rapists in women's prisons, I believe we would be in a very different situation to what we are now. In this regard, the media also has a lot to answer for with the insanity that has been allowed to unfold across this country with regard to gender ideology over the years. In conclusion, I would just like to say a big thank you to all the women who have worked with us directly on these campaigns, who have somehow supported them, or who have worked in their own way to push back against these affronts to women, girls, and reality. I would similarly like to extend my gratitude to the men who have been supporting us as well, and there are a lot of them. Working together with women across the ideological and political spectrum on these issues has been one of the great joys of my work over the last few years. Not only have I been able to work with some incredible women, but it is so refreshing to be able to do so in a culture where, generally speaking, if you have any difference of opinion, you are automatically written off as hateful and bigoted. As Kath mentioned yesterday, our strength is in our true diversity, and it makes sense that we have diversity on this issue, as our views are not based in ideology, but in simple biology. In reality, that's why they have such a widespread appeal. And the majority of Australians agree with us on them when they actually know what's going on. Thank you.